Hello everyone, I am Niilo Tarnanen from the KeyKulture podcast and I'm co-hosting this show with Matei Gheorghiu.
Hello everybody.
And today we are here to discuss the intercontinental nature of classical music. We have two guests, violinist Ella van der Mespel, originally from New Zealand and currently living in the Netherlands. Hello Ella.
Hi.
Then we have composer Itzam Zapata, who is originally from Mexico and is currently living in the United Arab Emirates. Hello, Itzam.
Hi Niilo.
Yeah,
Matei.
Nice to see you. Long time no see.
Itzam lived in Finland also with us,
yeah.
So we are friends.
For some years. We had nice times then. But okay, let's go to the topic. So I would like to first ask a bit more of your personal history. Let's start with Ella. Where and when did you grow up? Where did you study music? And when did you move around and where and why?
Okay. Well, I grew up in Wellington in New Zealand. And I was fortunate enough to grow up into a classical music family. So my mum's a violin teacher. And it was just kind of how you, in our environment. So it was very easy to begin music. So when I was 18, I did an audition to come and study in the Netherlands in Utrecht. I'm also lucky to have a Dutch passport, so that made studying in the Netherlands quite easy. And before I did that, I did 1 year of kind of pre-study, just to do something between moving to Utrecht and finishing high school in New Zealand. So then I did 1 year in the New Zealand School of Music in Wellington. And then I went and moved to the Netherlands and did my bachelor degree in Utrecht and then did my master's degree in Rotterdam. So, and here I am, still in the Netherlands. Yeah.
So are you still staying in Rotterdam or have you moved to another city recently?
Oh, I fell in love with Utrecht. It's beautiful with the old Roman architecture, and yeah, I couldn't move anywhere else afterwards. So I'm still living in Utrecht.
You said you have a Dutch passport, so are both your parents Dutch or one of them?
My dad is Dutch. I have actually 3 Dutch grandparents. That's strange, but yeah, so Dutch last name and Dutch passport. And
how is it for Itzam? Could you tell us about your background?
Well, I was born and raised in Mexico City. And when I was 18, I went to study for my bachelor's. In Mexico, I did all my studies in guitar, song composition. And then when I was 18, I moved to Finland to study composition. I don't have any passport from European Union. So the reason I actually applied to Den Haag.
Not yet.
Not yet, yes. Now I'm married to a Finnish national, so I could. But in any case, I actually applied to Den Haag, so we could have been closer. And I decided to go to Finland because it just gave the best benefits for students at the time. Now things have changed, but at the moment I applied, the skill education was for free. There were so many good benefits that someone from Mexico could actually afford to study in Finland. I did my bachelor's, my master's. I spent 1 year in Austria, in Salzburg, during Erasmus exchange. And then I moved to Dubai, to the United Arab Emirates. And now I'm working here in a school called Dubai College, mainly as a guitar teacher and doing some freelance composition. So a bit of changes everywhere.
A multifaceted history of life up to this point. Okay, both of you referred of having some of your studies in different countries and in different continents. So have you noticed any differences in the music education, like how the music theory is taught or how the instruments are taught or otherwise generally in the atmosphere or in the approach? Maybe Itzam, you were already talking about how it was possible to come to Finland, so perhaps you continue.
So in Mexico, our whole music education system is pretty much based in, I guess it's nowadays closer to the French system, in which we have conservatoires. So you basically go after school to the music school, right? Sorry, my baby's starting to cry. It's very similar
it has
to
happened
Finland,
before.
actually.
You wouldn't be the first one.
Yes. So it's very similar in Finland, right? With there's musiikkikoulu. So you go to school normally during the day, and then after school you go to your music school, right? And then there you have theory, you have solfege, you have your instrument, and else things. Now, in Dubai, it was actually very interesting because it's a completely different system, and I don't know. It may be in New Zealand, it might be similar, because in Dubai they have a peripatetic teaching, which means that during school times you have your lesson. So in a regular school, I'm not talking about the music school. So you go to math, and then you skip one lesson, and then you go to your music lesson. So you go to your instrumental lesson, because there is not after school music school per se. There are some institutes, but it's not the most common. And that comes from Britain. That comes from the UK education system. We actually, everything that is used in Dubai are Eversem and Trinity. And actually, I'm curious to know if New Zealand is probably similar. Still, maybe. I know that in US, they already changed that system. They don't use the kind of UK-based music system. So I'm also curious to know if it's the same in all the other ex-colonies of the UK, as Dubai is still, you know, in the 50s, it was still part of the UK.
This is interesting. So Ella, what could you say from the point of New Zealand?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It sounds quite similar in that we have a huge British influence. And even still, I think we perform more British music than I have performed British music in the Netherlands. In New Zealand, they perform Alba, Holst, Walton, Britain, everything British. It still has a very strong connection. So we also use like the exam systems, just like you were mentioning. So they've created now a New Zealand one. So New Zealand, what is it, NZMEB? It's like, and then often they try to do grade 8, and then once you have grade 8, you're kind of acceptable, or your standard of playing is acceptable enough to go into a conservatorium or to study music higher.
What is grade 8?
Yeah, so it's kind of like how do you
but I mean, our listeners don't probably know anything about this system. So
yeah.
I can explain it because I've been teaching it for a while now.
Okay.
So the two big ones are Eversem and Trinity. Trinity College and Eversem is associated board of the Royal Music, I believe. I might be wrong. So basically, you have 8 grades for every instrument and for other things. Each grade, you have to play 3 pieces. You have to do some oral testing, some sight reading, and that's it. And they change by level. So basically, grade 8 is kind of the last grade where you are now eligible to apply to a university by the UK standards.
Yeah.
If that's correct, yeah.
I think that sounds right. We also use like British theoretical terminology. So we use crotchets and minims in place from quarter notes and half notes and eighth notes. So we have a slightly different language that we use for theory. And from what I understand anyway, in New Zealand, there's still quite a strong emphasis on harmony and understanding theory from quite a young age. That I haven't experienced so much in the Netherlands. So that comes a bit later, I think, here anyway. Yeah, I don't know if you have a similar experience with that in Mexico or in Dubai, but if there's a difference between the two in the same way. But...
Yeah, it's because you need to do grade 5 theory in order to get past grade 5. So at some point you have to have good level of theoretical knowledge if you want to advance in those systems. In Mexico, it's a little bit. We actually have a private school that does Trinity in Mexico, but it's quite rare. As I said, our system is based in a combination of the French system, which obviously the the Spanish system is based on the French system. So then, our system is kind of a combination of both, which means that we have a lot of emphasis in actual solfege lessons, which I think in the British system, sometimes there is like the word solfege for some British people, it doesn't exist. They don't know what I'm talking about.
Same here. Yeah. Like in Romania, I would also say it's like based on the French system. And actually, when I went to the entrance exam in Finland, I had a big problem because I read the entrance exam and it was like theory exam. And then I saw solfege exam. And then I saw singing exam. And I was like, what? And then I had like another exam that sounded also like theory. And I was like, what does this all mean? And because in Romanian solfegiu is the singing part of the theory lesson. I guess that's also how it is in French. But that's not the case in Mexico, right?
Well, solfege is more like all practical abilities of music. So you do rhythm, you do singing, you do sight singing, and you do a little bit of hearing, for example. So so it kind of encompasses a bit of everything.
Perhaps put this to a bracket to the audience who may not have a personal experience in music theory. We are discussing of various ways of teaching how to deal with the notation and how to deal with the musical ideas behind the notation. How do musicians communicate about what are they actually playing or singing? And while you might think that it's approximately the same in every country or every language area, actually the terminology and the whole approach varies a bit between many European countries traditionally. And it seems that a bit based on what sides of the world have been colonized by which empire of Europe in some time, these influences have gone to various places in the world. Well, interesting. You were already referring, Ella, to the repertoire. So I would be interested to maybe hear more about that. You already, if I got it right, said that both in New Zealand and actually also in Netherlands, the orchestras or the chamber music ensembles are playing a lot of the British composers. So was this the case?
Well, almost. I might have explained myself quite poorly. In New Zealand, we play I think every other concert will have some British composer being performed, so quite frequently. And while I've lived in the Netherlands, I think I've performed 5 times a British composer's work, so not so often here. It's much more likely to come across Brahms or Mahler or something much more kind of Germanic. Yeah, I think that would be New Zealand classical musically still relates very much, I think, to its British influence. The Netherlands doesn't have that, so it's just much more kind of standard in what it performs here, I think.
And by standard, you may maybe mean that it's more similar to what it's in the other countries around Netherlands, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, they also, of course, will perform Dutch composers often, or sometimes, but I think less frequently than we would perform British composers in New Zealand, if that makes sense.
Well, if I can jump in for a second, like you're talking about British composers in New Zealand as if they're New Zealand composers.
Yeah.
Do they also perform New Zealand composers?
Definitely, and that's a new thing that started to become quite a big thing. New Zealand composers today often include influences from Maori and Polynesian instruments and musical styles. So often you hear like wooden drums that are carved out and hollow that are commonly used in Polynesian music. So they often are now looking back to our Indigenous people as opposed to looking to our colonist relationship. So it's really interesting to see what's happening now with composers living today, with how they write music. There is a real color that you can hear, and it often reflects very much our scenery, because we have also, like Finland, I think, beautiful mountains and beautiful nature, and often the music does reflect that. So,
well, I wouldn't bring any people to watch mountains in Finland, really, but maybe compared to the Netherlands. But otherwise, I get the point about kind of the maybe the vastness of the landscape, and that there is a lot of the nature compared to the urban habitats, which is maybe the more typical situation in, let's say, the Central Europe. How is it in Mexico, or how is it in United Arab Emirates?
So in Mexico, we do have like our classics from the Mexican culture. Funny you say about these kind of influences, because the nationalism movement in Mexico was at the same time than in Europe, so it was almost 100 years ago. So these pieces like Indian Symphony or Everything by Revueltas, or many of the composers during the first half of the 20th century, second half, draw a lot about from the new nationalist movement, same as Smetana and even Sibelius. So at that, it's kind of similar at that time. Nowadays, or repertoire in the orchestras it's very similar to what you see in I would say the average European orchestra, the average American orchestra, Beethoven, Mozart, Mahler, now it's interesting to your point, because I think we will have more premieres of Mexican composers than British pieces. For some reason, I don't know why, I'm sorry, but British music is not considered in Mexico like on the high class, like Germanic music, French tradition, or Austrian tradition, and so forth. So it's kind of in a second tier as the Spanish music. So if you hear the Falla, you will probably hear something by Britain, as in it's not very common. Beethoven is very common, yeah, even Mahler, things like this, but not British music. So I will say that you will probably hear a premiere or a piece by a Mexican composer more often than a British piece.
I'm here to break all the hearts. In Romania, we don't play much British music, Mexican music, or Spanish music. So
only Romanian music.
or New Zealand music. Well, actually, not so much Romanian music either. I think we play a lot of Enescu. Oh, yeah, and because I wanted to continue breaking hearts, we don't play much Sibelius either. So I have, the only time I heard the Sibelius Symphony when I lived there was in the Enescu Festival when London Symphony Orchestra played it. So you're gonna hear Sibelius Violin Concerto all the time, but that's it. And Finlandia. And I think you're as likely to hear Britain as you're going to hear the Falla. So you're gonna hear Elgar Violin or Cello Concerto, but that's it, I think.
So it's like a standard orchestra, basically.
It's like a standard orchestra, yes. Yeah. I mean, you're going to hear Mahler and Debussy and Ravel and Bruckner and all that, but look, I guess it's in every country like this. When I remember when I had Mezzo, the French classical music TV, like you could hear a lot of French music, but and every time I come across a CD of some less known piece like Saint-Saëns Requiem or Berlioz, I don't know what opera, it's always going to be a French orchestra, because I think it's normal that the countries where these people come from are going to play them more than the other countries. So influences are significant, but it's of course very interesting to hear how these influences work in your countries.
Yes, I would actually be interested to hear more about what Itzam. Maybe you were about to go to the situation in United Arab Emirates also.
Yeah, so okay, the UAE is a very unique country in terms of economics and how it works. Dubai is especially odd, and it's very young. If you think that Dubai has been growing for like 30 years, the Dubai Opera, I think, was launched. Let me just check this. It's in the last 5 years. So give me a second to tell you exactly when it was founded. It's 2016. So we got our first kind of music concert hall 4 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
There is not a national orchestra here. That is not to say that the golf, because okay, this is a complicated subject. Yeah. So for example, if you take Qatar, in Qatar, they do have an orchestra that has been working on for a couple of years because the ruler of Qatar wanted an orchestra. So he has been having an orchestra for a couple of years. Now the rulers of Dubai wanted an opera house, but because of economics, so far it's worth for them more to bring orchestras from abroad to present something than to have their own orchestra.
Really?
Yes. So if you see like the calendar of the concerts in Dubai Opera, it's the St. Petersburg orchestra playing, Nutcracker, the orchestra from Czech Republic playing Aida, things like that. Yeah, there is not an every week concert like in most countries. It's a per show kind of experience. So it works more like a.
And why is that?
I guess it's just economics. I guess it just makes more sense for them economically. That is not to say there is no need, because those
How can it possibly make sense
sold.
economically to bring people from other countries, whole orchestras all the time, instead of paying some local musicians to play every week for a normal salary?
Well, the thing is, like, you cannot pay local musicians because there is not enough local musicians to make an orchestra. So you will have to hire everybody from abroad. Yeah. So that is not to say there is no need. Every single concert is sold out. Like every time you go, you cannot go to the opera and sold out, and the prices are really high because there is a need. Dubai it has a population of foreigners that is 80%. So that population can be, it's a lot of people from all over the world, and seems to be that in general, if you put a lot of people from all over the world, they will go to these concerts. So they're always sold out. And I don't know, maybe in a couple of years, the ruler of Dubai will decide that Dubai needs an orchestra, that it's founded here, and he will impose. Actually, now, I don't know if this is not kind of like a Dubai Board of Tourism, but Expo is coming, Expo 2020, it's coming now in 2021, and they will make an orchestra for that, with the idea of that this orchestra will continue. I think before that we were talking about, you guys wanted to ask if religion has any kind of.
No. Let's wait for the questions for that. But
wait for that.
We ask them one at a time. So
maybe I was more about to ask whether
repertoire.
Whether any local influences are seen in the repertoire, or I don't know.
So the thing is, like, you cannot talk about local influences because we have 80% foreigners.
Okay.
So there is no local influence, if that's what you ask. The opera is it depends on the project. The projects are the most famous things that you can think of. You think of the Nutcracker, you think of Beauty and the Beast, think of things like that. There are many. Often the opera doesn't also work just for classical music. We have Phantom of the Opera. You have tennis games. So it's a little bit. Yes, yeah. This is real.
These games in an opera house.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a monkey. Now, with that said, there has been now in the last 3-4 years since I've been here, a lot of concert series. One of them in opera that is now having, well, before Corona happened, every month a soloist coming to have a concert. So, and they have been completely sold out. So there is a need and there is a grow, and I think there is just space to grow. Now, I do think that that's because of the education. We started talking about education, so we're just going to come back to that. Music education here, it's 10 times more important than actual concerts, because a lot of the expats here want to apply to schools abroad, either UK, US, and not like they're applying to Harvard, they're applying to Yale, they're applying to very fancy schools. And in order to have better chances to do that, they go through music education. Because if you have grade 8, grade whatever, you have better chances to get into Harvard or get into Cambridge or Oxford. I don't know the exactness of that and how it actually works. I do know that music schools here are quite profitable. There are a lot. There is an absolute need for music teachers more than performers. So that's why now I'm a music teacher, because there is just so much more work as a teacher than as a performer. Because performing, first of all, there is not that much liberty in terms of what you do. Most of it, you're going to be performing. Dubai is an incredibly touristic place. So most of the performing you're going to do is going to be in hotels. Because as I said, the opera is bringing their own orchestra. So it's not that you can play in the orchestra. It's not like you can form an ensemble and profitably have concerts of your own, because it's just so expensive. But you will have endless amount of students who want to have music. Maybe not to become a musician, that's never the goal here, but to have a decent grade to apply to a very good university. So it's really odd.
Yeah, I had two follow-up questions for this. Once you said that you have the opera house, but you have soloists coming to play concerts. So do you mean that this opera house works as a double opera and concert hall that plays symphonies and concertos? That would be a first follow-up question. And the second one would be if these people who are studying music subjects in school are usually part of this 80% of foreigners, or is also the local, let's say, Arab population coming a lot to these music schools, to these music lessons?
It's both. It's both. Arabs, and Arabs as a generalization, I'm talking about also people from Syria, from Egypt. Not only like people, the people from the United Arab Emirates. They do attend music concerts and they do a lot of music education. It's not.
Yeah, I meant the local Arab population, the one from United
the local Arab
Emirates.
population is as eager to do music lessons. Like I would say that of my students, I have many Arab students, and actually have many Indian students. I would say that in the Indian population here,
it's very
probably
big. Yeah.
It's not only big, but probably is the one that attends the most music education. I think that is because the music facilities in India for Western classical music is not as powerful. Now, you do have to specify here that you are teaching and that you play Western classical music. That is a very important differentiation that I never had to do, but you know, the world is a really big place, and places like India, places like, well, here in the Gulf countries, they do have another system. Iran has a huge system that has nothing to do with us. A lot of Chinese students, Japanese, so on and so forth. So you do have to be very specific when we are talking about Western classical music.
So from that point where you are now and what you can see about kind of where do the students come and how do they see the situation? So how would you actually say, what are the limits of the so-called Western classical music? So is it so that it's the classical music of Europe and US and what else? But it's not about classical tradition of India, or where would you draw the limits, kind of where our classical music is only our classical music, and where do you need to say that it's the Western classical music?
You're going to semantics a little bit too much.
I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting because it tells you something about, you know, the culture where you are in.
If you start playing music and somebody tells you play this scale, he's talking about, and the scale has 7 notes. He's talking about most of the time about Western classical music. He tells you play the raga. He's probably talking about Indian classical music. Now, with Western classical music, I will just make it even bigger, because so the music education here is not like, if you go into ABRSM, it's not only to do classical music. You will also do a little bit of pop music, a little bit of rock or whatever. So Western music also involves all kind of pop rock that is based from you know, I don't want to say you hear in the radio because you hear a lot of other things on the radio, but kind of based in the US and based in Europe. Yeah.
You still didn't answer about my orchestra and opera, but
Yeah, the orchestra. The opera house has many rooms. You know, has many like concert places. Yeah, it's a huge, beautiful place. But so it has a huge concert hall and then has smaller halls. So the chamber music concerts go to the smaller halls.
So when Moscow Philharmonic comes to play Nutcracker, they also play Bruckner Seventh and Beethoven Violin Concerto.
They will come to play Nutcracker.
Okay.
Because it's advertised like a Broadway show, so you will see the Nutcracker everywhere. You will get mail. You know, it's not. You will very, very seldom will see. But for example, when the EU Youth Orchestra came, they played John Adams. They played a lot of they play a new piece. They play a premiere, and it was still full. So it kind of really doesn't matter what you bring; it will still be full.
Right.
So there was when they came, they played 2 pieces by Yoda. They played Philip Glass, John Adams, and a premiere, and it was completely full for the 3 days that they came. And it was just a youth orchestra. I'm not saying just, but you know, it's not. It literally doesn't matter what you put there; it will be sold out because of the marketing, which I think is something that Europe, US, and I think most Western countries need to learn. That the way they market here classical music is the same that they will market Justin Bieber concert. So it doesn't matter what is the style of the music. The marketing push and the marketing logistics behind it are the same. There is not oh, you don't need to put money into run. No. You push it the same way, you will get the same results. You will feel it and whatever price you want.
I think this enthusiasm and the marketing is something we need to get back. But meanwhile, I would really love to ask one follow-up question from Ella about the indigenous influences in New Zealand musical culture, if I understood it correctly. So many of the New Zealand composers are using, for example, the Polynesian instruments or otherwise taking influences. But how is the kind of background of these composers? Do they have own heritage in Maori or other Polynesian peoples, or are they mostly of the British heritage?
Okay, so do you mean when you talk about heritage in terms of education, so how they're taught, or do you mean in terms of their own identity?
Yeah, I was actually more referring to kind of their kind of ethnicity, like who were their parents and kind of the culture they learned in their homes. But of course, the school system, that level also is interesting.
Okay. Well, I think in classical music still, I think it's starting to develop a bit more, although it's taking its time. But we're starting to see a bigger number of Polynesian and Māori interest. But that hasn't been the way for a while. It's taken a very long time for that to be really integrated. But I think most of the composers are still, we call it Pākehā. That's the Māori word for European settlers or people who have immigrated to New Zealand, because we are the immigrants, really. We're not the Indigenous people. So the Pākehā people are often still the ones who have are the ones writing classical music today. So their personal histories aren't necessarily Polynesian or Māori, but there is now in the New Zealand School of Music anyway, from what I remember or understand, courses in like gamelan. So you learn how to become familiar with the gamelan and with other instruments that aren't traditionally European or used in European music. So there's becoming a greater awareness of what these sounds are and how we can incorporate them into contemporary New Zealand music. So it's creating a kind of new culture. We're still also quite a young country, and I think it wasn't until maybe the 1970s, I would say roughly, that we kind of started to really grow our own culture, a little bit separate from the British, which is, yeah. So we're young. We've still got a long way to go. We're not there yet, but it's pretty special when you can hear this immersion of culture in music.
This is interesting, and I think comparing it to, for example, countries like the Netherlands, that is, well, it's a small country, but it's in the heart of Europe anyway.
Yeah.
Then, for example, Finland, that is kind of in the edge of Europe and kind of the periphery, but the process of emerging the national identity happened much earlier, kind of the same situation to, for example, Mexico. Then on the other hand, the situation, or kind of, let's say, the balance of the indigenous and the European settlers is probably a bit different than, for example, in New Zealand, I guess. What would you say, Itzam?
Well, I think there has been for the last 100 years like attempts to do what Elle is saying that is happening in New Zealand, of putting certain indigenous instruments. The problem is that the indigenous population in Mexico has been incredibly left out of society, and that's kind of a huge problem with a lot of political implications. Even though it's huge, I mean, we're talking about millions of people who have indigenous heritage. We're talking about the revolution that also erased a lot of the connections that, like, I have no idea how much indigenous heritage I have because my grandmother doesn't know anymore, you know? So it's very hard to track these kind of things of ethnicity, and because we're anyway, like, at the end of the day, we're kind of all brown. So some of them different shades of brown. Like my nose is, you know, has some sort of indigenous heritage, but it's hard to tell for most of the people in Mexico. Regarding to music, the problem is, like, we know nothing about what the old civilizations did musically. Like, we know very little about the Aztec music, about Maya music, about all of these cultures' music. We know some of the instruments, but it was very ritualistic. So there were attempts to kind of there's like a famous the Sinfonia India by Carlos Chavez, which is from the 40s, 50s, which is a beautiful piece, and it kind of attempts to bring this kind of folkloric music from the indigenous people. It ends up being it's a great piece, but the folkloristic elements are just pentatonic scales, so it's very.
So it's mostly assumed, like this is probably how it's.
It's assumed, exactly. So a lot of it is assumed. The indigenous people currently living, as I said, they're completely left out of society, and they will most likely want to adapt to the, like, they will most likely will hide their language. They will just speak English. I mean, speak Spanish, and play Western classical music. You know, learn how to play guitar and do some folk music, than try to attempt to get their own songs from hundreds of years ago to the forefront. So even though there's attempts, there's small political problems in that sense, and unfortunately, I have myself like written songs in Nahuatl and in other like languages native from Mexico, but it's which meant that I had to go into trying to find these people and try to get the pronunciation right and try to do this investigation. But it's a small. I think I would say that of all Mexican composers nowadays, at least one of their opus is going to be something related to that background. Like, you can take literally any Mexican composer and you will find something which is a Nahuatl word or a Maya word or something like that, the title of the piece, something relating to that. So it is still important in the cultural aspect of our nation as a country, and of all artists, not only the musicians. Painters are incredibly fascinated. They have always been fascinated by the indigenous art and by all these indigenous things. And I would say that anyway, visual arts are the biggest artistical export that Mexico has anyway. So it's I hope that kind of answers the question. It's a very complicated question to ask. You probably need to read a lot of books to understand even a little bit of them. So
perhaps we won't, find the end of that discussion today.
Exactly.
But perhaps Matei wants to ask the next
I was thinking about the questions we have here, and I just wanted to tie the loose ends for these like first few questions so that we can also move on to the next one. So all in all, could you tell us if classical music, Western classical music, do you think has an important role in the places you talk about, like Mexico and United Arab Emirates and New Zealand? And for example, if you would say that, what other differences there are that you would talk about? And if the public there is different than the public in, let's say, the Western countries where you have also lived. Let's start with Ella.
Yeah, I think classical music has is an important part of both Dutch culture and New Zealand culture. I think it's quite hard for me personally to say, because I grew up in a musical family. So I kind of grew up just assuming that was how everything, I thought every child played violin. Took a while to realize that that wasn't the case. So yeah, for me personally, it's a bit hard to kind of see it away from that. But I do think that it is, there's so many educational programs where they involve classical music with children, and just reaching out across other kind of parts of the country and making it more attainable. But I still think it's not a tradition, so to say, because it's not really been, we haven't had long enough to establish it as a tradition. Whereas in the Netherlands, it is where, well, Europe is kind of where classical musical began, really. So it's got much more of its roots based here. It's a funny, it was a funny thing you were talking about the public. The Dutch have this culture which I found quite strange in the beginning, and I still am not really used to it, where regardless as to how the performance was, they stand up. After every concert, they stand up. They're not necessarily clapping, but you could play terribly and they will stand up. It's took
really?
me a long.
Whereas in Finland, no matter how good someone plays, you're gonna get clapped 3 times and that's it. No?
Yeah,
That's
and if somebody stands out, that's kind of, it needs to be very special, or then the people who are standing out are a bit,
less educated.
Who are these people?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it is in New Zealand too. So the Netherlands, this is always a thing. They go up straight after you finish your last note, and
so enthusiastic, at least in that sense.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
How about Itzam?
I think in Mexico it's still it's important, and there is a lot of classical music activities going on. Like all my education, for example, was in a huge classical music institute. It was all for free. It was all supported by the government. Maybe I had to pay like $2, you know, for this kind of things. So the government is very much involved in supporting classical music. There is, for example, one of the most famous Mexican pieces, Huapango by Moncayo. It's in the advertisement of the beer, of Corona beer in Mexico. So it's part of the, let's say, zeitgeist of the culture in Mexico. Now, it might not look like it sometimes. So there is obviously a huge class differences in Mexico, and that also trickles down into what people can do with music. I think the newer generation, it's less involved with classical music than the old generation, because you know the older people used to go to going to a concert in Mexico to see the orchestra. It's really cheap. You're paying like $1, $2 to go to see the orchestra because it is funded by the government. So there's a very there's a lot of money put into the arts in Mexico, at least in Mexico City. I don't want to talk about other places because otherwise other people are going to hear, well, you know, we don't have an orchestra in our city and there's no money for culture. And that's true. Again, we go back to classes, you know, different classes, and Mexico City is the richest city in Mexico. It has the most access to culture, and it does pay it back. It just like I grew up going to the orchestra every weekend as a student, paying nothing. So it was very accessible to me. It's very accessible to everybody. The concert halls are not full, that I have to say. It's not, but there is always concert everywhere all the time. We had, at some point, we had 4 to 5 orchestras going on at the same time.
Just in New Mexico.
Just in Mexico City.
Oh, New Mexico, Jesus. Mexico City.
But it's a huge city anyway, right?
It's a huge city. It's 20 million people, but still like one orchestra per 5 million. It's still good enough if you think about that. A huge percent of the population will not go to the orchestra.
How about Dubai?
Well, Dubai, it's I think the importance of classical music is more, as I said before, on the education. That is growing new listeners. That is growing a new generation of really young people that don't have these stigmas against classical music, especially because classical music is slowly kind of accepting the new way, starting to make music videos, starting to make more like accessible. I think even if it looks like dire, there is an attempt by many performers and many classical musicians to create a visual interface to your music. So like having better videos, having better, again, marketing to their art, because the way the younger generation, as far as I see with my students, they really don't care about like the label of classical music. They don't care about the label of rap. They don't care about this label. There's so many styles nowadays.
Is it cool or not?
It doesn't matter. That's kind of the thing. Like, I have students who love to listen to classical guitar, and it's just part of the YouTube videos. It's not a thing. It's like everybody has a weird niche, and for some people, their niche is recorded music.
Hey, a small follow-up question for you, because you speak about Dubai. Probably you don't know much, but United Arab Emirates, there's how many Emirates? Was it 5? And I think Dubai is like the richest one, and Abu Dhabi. But what's in the rest of the country? Do you know anything about that? Like, do they have any orchestras somewhere else than Dubai, or?
No, there is no orchestra. There is. They're starting to find, like I think it was 2 years ago, that they founded a really big music institute in another emirate in Ashman, and the other emirates are very small. They are, but they all have some sort of music institute giving music education. Now, Abu Dhabi is the richest. Dubai is just the most popular one. It's a touristic one. Abu Dhabi also doesn't have an orchestra per se, but does have more production in that sense. It's just economics here. It's just capitalism. If it's worth for you to sell the tickets, you will have the tickets. So it's also growing. As I said, we have 4 years with a place to have concerts. Before that, there was not a single like performing center where you could have big orchestras. You just couldn't fit them.
Mm-hmm.
You only had I think it's Coca-Cola Stadium or something like that for pop concerts, and that's it. So it's growing dramatically.
Great.
Now, when we're speaking about the venues and financing and marketing and these kind of things, I think it could be actually interested to follow a bit of comparison of these things. For example, Itzam, you referred to that in Mexico, for example, the state is very much involved and the concert tickets are quite cheap, but on the other hand, the concerts are not full and so on, which is kind of similar to what it is or was in Finland. I would say that nowadays the houses are mostly full, at least in the big places. How is it, for example, in New Zealand? Ella, what would you say about what is the role of the government or municipalities in the New Zealand music life, and how is it for the audience? Is it cheap to go to the concerts? Is it popular?
So I think anyway, the government do finance a part of like the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra and New Zealand Ballet, all the main New Zealand performing arts institutes. But I don't think they financed all of it. I think there is also funding privately. And I think as a student, of course, just like in Europe, you can get student rush tickets or discount tickets. They're not what I would say really cheap, and they're not what I would say also really expensive. They're just, it's something you might be able to afford to do once a month as a student.
So it's more expensive than a bottle of beer.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Exactly, good comparison. Occasionally we get international orchestras that also come and tour around New Zealand, and then it's full. It's really, really full, and people really do kind of scramble to get tickets. I remember like Janine Jansen, she's come to New Zealand and it was just sold out every time. Some of the bigger orchestras, when they come, it's completely full. It can be the case that it's also full for New Zealand orchestras. It's just not always full. In terms of like freelancing, or in terms of composing or chamber music groups, there's a kind of grant fund called Creative New Zealand. And it's just like, I guess Finland, I'm not sure, it would be an assumption, but you have to apply to get money, and then the government can finance it because it's a branch of the government, I think. So it's just like you write and you keep your fingers crossed that you get the money to be able to perform and work. Yeah, it sounds great what the deal is in Mexico, though. I mean, if you can get such cheap tickets to go to a concert, and if the government can finance all the musicians, I mean, wow.
Well, it's not like it's well financed, you know. Musicians are probably like not very well paid, but yeah, I mean, it's a living. It's not a great living, but it's a living.
Since you touched the grant system, like I would just say for the audience who's listening, so in Finland, and I guess in pretty much all the 5 Nordic countries like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, there is like a year-long grant system for composers to apply to get pieces performed. And there are other working grants where you apply and say, I'm going to compose this and this and these pieces for 1 year or 2 years or half year or something, and you could get those. But then there's also a few places where you can apply to get commission, like a musician applies to get money to write one piece by one composer. And I know that in Romania, there's just only one place where you can apply, which is the Romanian Cultural Foundation, where pretty much every artist applies to get their concerts or festivals. So if you want to get money from the, let's say, there's one foundation. I would be interesting to know how's the case in these countries. Is there any such thing as comparable to how we have in Finland or not? So you said in New Zealand there's this one place.
Well, it is for all of the arts, but I'm assuming they've got quite a bit of money to be able to hand out to be able to support the arts. But they also have, we have 2 full-time professional orchestras. The biggest one being the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. They always have a composer in residence. I don't know for how many years it is. Could be 2 or 3. I'm not sure. But then the composers kind of work alongside with the orchestra, and composers works frequently for them to perform. And so that gives them also a chance to be able to frequently have their works performed. Yeah, I just think it's a bit tough. It's not easy, but that's probably the case everywhere.
How about Netherlands?
Oh, the Netherlands, I think we have a very, I actually love the culture or the idea. It's quite an avant-garde contemporary approach to writing modern music. And we have festivals that are like the Gheorghiu Music Festival, where there are lots of contemporary composers, and they think far beyond the box. It's like some things where, you know, this idea of what makes art. It's a little bit what makes music. Where's the line drawn, you know? And I think that a lot of composers really push that line, the boundary of what, if I'm being really honest, sometimes I think it's not quite my taste, but I really appreciate the creativity of it. So there is some funding for it here. I think possibly more so here than in New Zealand. Yeah, it's a bit of a culture here. Yeah.
It sounds a bit like the Dutch and then maybe the Danish contemporary music scenes might be one of the most kind of, let's say, explorable in a way that they are open to many kind of, what's the word?
Sonorities.
No, I'm like any kinds.
Ideas.
No, you're too vague. Or maybe I'm also too vague, but I'm talking about like
you're getting into semantics again.
Experimental, yeah, like that they are quite open to experimentation, whereas maybe some other countries where the contemporary music scene is also quite big, it's maybe not kind of that open to the experimentalism anyway. Like I would say that in Finland, it's more easy to get onto the top of the, let's say, the hill if your music is not too experimental in a way, even if it needs to be kind of in the modernistic aesthetics in a way. Quite often, at least that's the way it's perceived.
Niilo, just when I said about the grant systems, I concentrated on composers, but I guess the point was not necessarily composers from what I was saying. So like many people who are musicians can also apply here to these foundations to get financing for their projects, whatever they are. And my question was mostly also in that sense, like could someone in New Zealand or in the Netherlands say, hey, I want to organize this kind of concert and let's apply money from there. And
or how is it for chamber music ensembles?
Yeah.
This is part of the question too.
Well, in New Zealand, there's Chamber Music New Zealand. They host and organize tours and concerts around the country. You have to apply and probably write a very long, detailed application as to why you're deserving of the funds or the chance to be able to perform. But there is definitely a public for chamber music, and so I think that's quite successful there. In the Netherlands, it's, I think, more a gemeente, that's like the municipality kind of based, centered financial grants. So you apply for your specific municipality, and then if you're lucky, you'll get some money to be able to perform. But often it works also here with foundations or stichtings. So if you belong to a foundation or something, then you can, it's complex. It's really complex. And I'm not so good at it all. So I often just keep my fingers crossed and hope. But yeah.
So Itzam, how is it in United Arab Emirates? Previously, you were discussing about that big orchestral shows or opera shows are brought from abroad to there for making some shows. But how about some like chamber music? Is it kind of, does it happen there? Or does it then happen in some hotel lobbies that you were referring?
I think it's like I can count them with 1 pound, maybe not with two. There have been attempts, for example, NYU Abu Dhabi. There's New York University in Abu Dhabi that had a concert series in which we had like every month a different chamber music concert. My wife actually has played there. My wife is also a violinist, and they were using kind of local musicians, as in people who are here. It was quite successful and it was working very well. The same as the one I talked about before, that is in the opera. But if we speak about composition and things like this, there is, as everything is just based on private institutions.
So it's capitalism, proper capitalism.
Proper capitalism. There is no government funding for this. Now there starts to be. There's a place where they're starting to have some money from a sheikh that is giving some money for the arts. Again, application and so on and so forth. It's starting with visual art, but it's supposed to expand to music. And in Mexico, we have also like a central grant system. It's actually quite nice. Let me change to my headphones because my baby's cry again.
It's very nice for the young couple. You can only apply if you are less than 35. And the way it works is that all the people from all the arts that get selected to that grant, they get some money for a year, and then they have to meet each other in 3 sessions to talk about art, basically. So you basically get like a weekend off where you meet all painters, visual artists, comic book, theater, dance, all the arts, and they just smash them together and make them talk about what they're doing, which I think has been very beneficial. Like a lot of the artist, every single artist that has been some name, more or less, not everybody, but has gone through that system, me included. So it has been a very beneficial system because also you get the connections with other arts to then grow forward in Mexico.
This is interesting. It sounds that it's not that competitive to get in that kind of program. Whereas
it is very competitive. It is very competitive.
It is.
It's like, something like 2% acceptance rate. So it is very competitive.
Okay. You just said that pretty much everybody gets into it. So maybe I confused.
Everybody who ends up being an artist in Mexico most likely has gone through that.
Okay.
That's different. So
that's kind of the gate, and then if you go through that gate, then it's kind of okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
That would be more accurate. Yeah.
Then you will be part of the 1%, which is 2%.
Exactly. And there's of course a lot of political problems with that because many people are against that. That in your CV kind of gives you already a leg up in terms of other projects, because in Mexico most of the art is financed publicly, especially music. The other arts have some private foundations, but music it's mainly just public funding. While in Dubai everything is just private funding. completely diametral positions.
Interesting. So if you could combine the best bits of kind of every way of funding, how would you do it? Or is it even possible? Is it just the way that if some model dominates in some country, then it's not really a space for the other? Or what do you say? Would it be possible to, for example, market the orchestra concerts in Finland like they market them in the most capitalistic way in the Dubai?
Yeah, I would really like to hear that.
I think so. I think that especially nowadays, all the countries where art is basically funded by public by the public funding, there's a lot of bureaucracy there, and there is the way that money goes, of course, maximizes that the money will go to the artist, which it's correct. Don't get me wrong, it's correct, but you lose the ability to receive more money if you don't let the private money come in. And in order to let the private money come in, you need to also put a lot of money into marketing, into like, when would you see, for example, like if you think about RSO, does RSO has a successful Instagram page?
Yeah, Radio Symphony Orchestra from Helsinki.
Yeah, Radio Symphony from Helsinki. Does it have a good Instagram page? Does it post often on TikTok?
That's true. And I was also thinking about this, like whenever you want to organize a festival in Finland or a concert, you will be able to get money from these 10 foundations that everybody knows.
Then not.
Well, I mean, but you're not going to see sponsors. You're not going to see this concert has been done with Nordea Bank, with ING, exactly, and with some petrol company. It's never going to happen. And because
with exception of some like, let's say, instrument sponsoring for the young talents. That happens.
Maybe, sure, but like it's very hard to organize events. Like if you don't get these grants, there is not many other places to go, and those bigger companies know that, and they're like, well, why do you come to us? You have your grant system. So,
but is it really this way, or is it more like that we haven't tried it out properly? I mean, that maybe it would be really interesting to hear about the background of the people who are doing the marketing stuff.
I had a chat with the Finnish composer Pasi Lyytikainen, who has gotten some other sponsor for his festival, and I asked him, and he said, like, well, in Finland we don't even try to go to other sponsors.
Yep, but he's a composer, so I guess the people who are making the phone calls to get the sponsors in Dubai, they are not composers, right? They are probably professionals in doing that. So maybe my question is
the thing is that why if you have a concert, let's say Justin Bieber is coming to Dubai, and why does he get sponsorship from Coca-Cola? Because Coca-Cola will be sold in the arena, because it's a place where the youth are gonna go, so it's probably good to advertise to the youth Coca-Cola, because old people don't drink Coca-Cola, right? So maybe they do, you know what I mean. But I think that
everybody drinks Coca-Cola, man.
Yeah, but the classical music world is so pure in their own ways that they will not, first of all, they will not even approach Coca-Cola, and second of all, they will not approach Coca-Cola with the proper
attitude
reason for them to invest on them. Like, there has to be a good incentive for Coca-Cola to put money in classical music, even if it's just for their own selfish PR reasons. And I think that's something that Dubai is doing very well, that it really doesn't care that it's classical music. It
as long as it's,
as long as they get the money for it, and as long as the people sponsoring get the money, get the sponsor out, they get the marketing out, they get the message across. And I think there's a lot to learn from not only the pop world, because the pop world has their own problems, but just marketing in itself. Even the art world is 10 times more successful in getting sponsorships and getting money from private entities than the music world. In Mexico, there's a juice company that pays for the biggest art exhibition in Mexico every year. It's a juice company that makes, like soda. So why cannot we get that?
I will also think that in Dubai, you said that there's one orchestra, which is not really an orchestra, it's more like a concert hall. And there's like, 4 million people living there? How much?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so in Finland, you have 15 orchestras for 5 million people. So it's probably a bit easier to organize some kind of Justin Bieber-ish image to one orchestra for 5 million people than for all the orchestras for 5 million people,
Probably.
But then, as far as I remember, the EU Youth Orchestra was sponsored by MasterCard. So why not?
Yeah, but I mean, like, the public is dreaming for that classical music, and there's only one concert hall. So then it makes sense to like put money into it, because you're gonna get the money back. But if there would be all of a sudden 10 orchestras in Dubai, maybe sponsors would not be jumping into, support all of them in the same way.
Unless if they are competing against each other. I think if we refer to music history, and sorry if this gets too nerdy, then just cut me off. But like, for example, the Renaissance polyphony was quite a lot actually driven by the fact that in the lowlands, that was the term probably used that time, the various cities were competing, and the various churches were competing against each other, like what of them has the best music. So they actually gave some money to the composers who started composing more complex music in order to make a good kind of fancy impression. So I don't know, maybe in some weird way we could get into a situation in modern world where, let's say some football millionaires would be thinking like, hey, I want to have my own music, which is only my music. And then they start paying for composers and bands for doing just their music, which they will, I don't know. This is just weird.
I mean, you say it like as a, but if you think about the Champions League, the hymn of the Champions League,
true,
it's Handel.
Yeah, it's Handel. So
no, but well, it's pastiche of Handel. It's actually done by
I think it's pastiche. I think it's I think it's an actual composer wrote in the pastiche. But that should be a lesson that classical music can go into all of these fields. So there is a world in which whatever Bayern Munich or whatever Real Madrid and classical music do go together. it's not unheard of, as they are already together. It's the hymn. The hymn is not even if they wanted, it's not the Seven Nations Army, right? Which is kind of the hymn in the stadium. So, well, I don't know. This is a more complex topic. Let's
I don't know. How does all of this sound to Ella?
Oh, I don't know. A lot of history could repeat itself, and if that could be a possibility, but I think the day that I see Ronaldo fork out money for a symphony orchestra, oh, it'll be a wonderful day. So yeah, I have no idea.
Well, nobody knows. Nobody knows.
And maybe we go a bit on.
Perhaps yes, Matei. Do you have a specific?
Yes, I was going to ask about is also the music scene in New Zealand influenced a lot by Australia, and what's the relationship between the two countries? And also, I was thinking throughout the conversation, because you spoke about Maori and Polynesian influences, what's the communication between New Zealand and, let's say, the other smaller island countries from the region?
I would say that our music scene in New Zealand, it's not influenced by Australia, so to say. I would say that Australia has its own identity, and New Zealand has its own identity as well. But we have a relationship between the two countries. So, for example, in the youth orchestra, there's always one position for a New Zealander to go to the Australian Youth Orchestra, and one Australia can come to the New Zealand Youth Orchestra. When you apply for a job in an orchestra, so for example, in Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, the first round of auditions are open for Australians and New Zealanders equally. So we are both given the same amount of chance or possibility to have work in both countries. And the same in New Zealand, it's also open to Australians first, before the rest of the world. So Europeans get the second invitation. And then talking about the relationship between some of the Polynesian
like
islands.
Musically, let's say, not like something else.
That's really tough, I think. From my understanding, there isn't a huge classical music culture in the Polynesian islands, in Samoa or Fiji. They have very much a musical culture of their own, but it's not so classically based. And New Zealand, actually, it also has, I really don't know how to explain this, but a sort of responsibility to take care of some of the smaller island nations, specifically closer to New Zealand, because the Pacific Ocean is very vast and huge.
Yeah, like is it so that Kiribati is supposed to be in a couple of years be completely underwater, and they bought some land in New Zealand? And
yeah, exactly. And I mean, not to get too political, but I'm quite proud of having a prime minister like the one we do have, who is open-minded enough to be able to say, if there are countries in the Pacific that do sink, we're going to absorb them into New Zealand. So to kind of embrace their cultures as well. So that will be interesting to see how that will also impact our musical society. If that happens, I hope only if, but I'm afraid that global warming has possibly gone a bit further than that. Yeah, so it's quite hard to explain a bit more about a classical relationship between New Zealand and the Polynesian islands. But in terms of Australia, they're very different identities.
And for Itzam, I had a question about if you would say that Islam and Islamic culture plays a role in classical music training in United Arab Emirates.
So it's hard to say, because there is a lot of different interpretation of how Islam and music works. So the more rigid, for example, don't allow women to play, for example, which is not the case here, but I know it's the case in some parts. Dubai is really free, even in terms with the Islamic population. But for example, during Ramadan, you are not supposed to have concerts. So public music it's still abide and not used, even though you are allowed to play and you're allowed to teach. So I'm not an expert about all the small connotations about all the readings of the Quran and music, but there are some problems in certain. For example, I know that in Afghanistan, where they were trying to found the first music school proper, there were a lot of problems with that because many people didn't want music education, especially for girls.
Yes,
They didn't
yes.
want music education there. But what I can see from the younger generation is that, first of all, I have a lot of music students. The gender is not relevant in that sense, and it's the same for most of the people who come here to get educated from the Arab worlds. So, for example, there's a strong Egyptian population in Egypt. They absolutely have no problems with music. There is no conflicts between them. So I think there is like, it goes on a case by case basis, depending the country, depending the reading of the Quran, the interpretation of the Quran, of the specific community that you're talking about, and the relationship to music. So it's really big. Like the Islamic faith is so vast. If you take people from Indonesia, they're gonna have they love music. So it's a really complicated question to ask because there are just so many different interpretations of that. And inside them, some people might be very liberal. Some people might love classical music. Some people might not. I don't know if that kind of explains. I'm sorry, this is very vague, but
No.
So did I get the point right that because people come to work in Dubai from so many different countries, and so also so many variants of the cultures from Islamic countries happen there. So it's really hard to say any one way how it
exactly
how it influences.
So
Yeah,
what I
okay.
can see, mostly there's absolutely no problems with music education and music interpretation. Most of the Arab world they do have the definition of, okay, this is Western classical music, but they embrace it now as a bigger part because of just like pop world and radio. Like they hear the same radio as us, if that makes sense, you know. And even like the Arabic pop music, it has more to do nowadays with Western music than with their own roots. They consider that as kind of a folk variant. So, for example, if you think about like oud players that play Quanon or this kind of I forgot the scale, like some scales that involve microtones and stuff like that. The classical music in Iran, they are all considered some sort of folk music, yeah. So there is not kind of like a huge tradition because they see their own pop by itself may have some touches of that. If you hear like Egyptian pop music, it might have some kind of microtonal twist and some like Phrygian scales going on, but mostly is Western based.
Yeah, I also asked this question also from like not as much as in what places women can play or not, but also in like culturally. I mean, you know, I mean, Christianity, I would say, has influenced a lot the classical music tradition. Like we have masses, we have requiems, we have forms and genres that were shaped by the church. Let's say, like all the early classical music in Europe emerged from the church, right? So is there any such kind of, let's say, religious influence to the music that is being done in but you said that there is not much composing going on made by, let's say, local Arab people born in the United Arab Emirates. So maybe that answers the question altogether. But
I mean, like I know, for example, a couple of local composers here, and what they write is closer to Steve Riley, to Philip Glass, some sort of minimalism, because that's what they like. It's not really, it's just like aesthetic decision. I don't know. I think it's a hard question for me to answer because I am not myself Arab, so I don't know
no
the
problem.
history of.
But maybe as a particular question, I don't know if this tells anything, but for example, do you harmonize Bach chorales there as a part of your harmony exercises?
Of course, it's part of the Eversm curriculum, so it's all
okay.
based on
so
on
basically,
British,
you do whatever they do in UK, and you don't kind of care its origins, or
no. I mean,
Yeah.
every once in a while, I like to add something flavorful here. I'm playing with my guitar ensemble, a piece called Tunis by a French composer. So, and it's nice, but it's not like we have done some Ravi Shankar, but it's my own choice to kind of do something out of. But if it was for them, they would just play Bach like any other country. It's not like one of my Egyptian students just loves, you know, Francisco Tárrega and Spanish music, and his grandmother is an oud player. So it's really modernized. If what I'm saying, it's not, there is not this kind of nationalistic point of view in the music. And
Right,
most of
right.
them, are just very young nations. If you think of the Gulf countries.
Itzam and Ella, both of you born outside of Europe, and have you ever encountered this kind of European feeling of superiority, so to say? So that, that maybe this sounds stupid, but kind of that people inside of classical music would kind of think that whatever is done in Europe is more kind of
Quality.
important because that's where the classical music tradition comes from. Or is it more like that people are more open to whatever is happening right now? What do you think? What's your experience, if you can tell some personal stories about this?
It's a broad question, but it's an interesting one. So,
Well, Europe is, of course, is a really big place with many countries. Yeah, they all have their own opinions. Generally, they do look inward. They kind of don't care so much about what's happening culturally in the rest of the world, which is the opposite. Like in Mexico, we look what they're doing in US, we look what they're doing in Europe. We're very much interested and involved in that. We look what they're doing in South America also. Like we are interested in the people, what are they doing in Argentina, Colombia, so on and so forth. And my first shock in Europe was that they just don't care. There's very little, I'm not saying everybody, but most of them, like for example, very few even knew not only a composer from Mexico, but a composer from Latin America. Like maybe they will knew Piazzolla or something like
or
that.
Ginastel, yeah.
Exactly, and they really didn't care that much, and they did see it as, I think in Europe they even see, for example, American music as inferior.
I mean, from the United States, yeah.
From the United States, yeah, which was for me also a bit of a shock because, you know, US is such a powerhouse in literally everything, including the arts. So it's not too, it sounded to me kind of a bit insane how little thought they put into American composers.
And are you now referring mostly to your experiences in Finland, or?
Yeah, I'm talking about my experience in Finland, my experience in Austria, also where I live, and even yeah. So basically, they were surprised I had any kind of music education, even though like music education, Western music education, even the music education in Mexico dates from like literally after colonization. So we have more than 400 years of music tradition with composers in every single 100 years of those. And some of them are very high quality. I'm not gonna say they're better than Bach, but you know, there were Baroque composers, there were neo-Baroque composers, classical, romantic, every single thing that happened in Europe happened in Mexico.
Please name us a few
Well,
composers
like
from
one of the most famous
century.
composers, like it's Manuel M. Ponce, which it's one of the most famous as concertos and all of the things like that. Of course, the 20th century is probably the best if you want to have listen to Mexican nationalistic music. But yeah, to go forward with that question is, yes, Europe looks inward. I saw it, we talked about it before. I saw it when also we went to Malaysia. And then in Malaysia, they really don't care what's happening in Europe. And I think it's so far away and it's such a different culture. And Europe tends to think that what happens in Europe kind of spreads everywhere, and it's not the reality. And for example, I see it now, sorry if I get political, you see it now with the crisis. We see it now with the crisis of the vaccines, right? That Europe promises vaccines for everybody. and the vaccines from everybody are coming from China and from Russia. So again, Europe thinks that they are, you know, the ones bringing everything to the world when it's not happening. And I feel like in the arts, but the big difference with the art is that I think is economic, because Europe, it's still a center of the art because it's economically profitable for them to be. But I'm saying people that go as tourists to Europe, they go to France, they go to Paris to see the Louvre, right? They go to see the museums, they go to see the concert halls, they go to Vienna to see the opera hall. Yeah. So it's in their best interest to promote and export culture. While in other places, like in Mexico, nobody comes to watch the orchestra, right? If you go to Mexico, you go to the beach, you go to like the cool nightclubs, you go to find some pot, and you know, you go to do this kind of things. It's a different incentive. While in Europe, it's very much incentivized to promote culture because it's economically profitable. The same here in Dubai, it's not economically profitable to support the arts because there is no need to. People come here for the beach, they come here for the experience, they come here for the massages, you know, they come here to lay down in the 25 degrees. So that has to do a lot with and that's sometimes what they don't see in Europe, that you guys, people come to you for the arts and then you deliver that. But that doesn't mean that art is not happening everywhere in very much more harsh conditions than that. Like the condition in which art is done in Angola are very much harsh, and that doesn't diminish the quality of their art. And I think that's a problematic question.
So you may mean that Europeans are kind of too laid back in thinking that, okay, we're doing okay, so we don't need to care anything else.
In a way, I think they don't see the privilege that you have in terms of art creation. You don't see that, and that privilege is not because of talent or efficiency, but because, again, you have so much more money put into the system.
Yeah, the system is built in. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about our friend from the Kiwis?
Yeah, oh, it's a really tough question, actually. And it's really hard because I think,
Itzam got upset and left.
No, I'm here. I need to take care of my baby. 1 second.
Okay. Go ahead. I'll put the speaker view anyway.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard because in any way you say something, you're going to be making a generalization, of course. So
of course, yeah.
But maybe you tell us something that you have personally experienced. So
I mean, yeah, I can easily. I mean, I was talking actually a bit about this with my brother because he's a double bass player who lives in the UK, but he also studied in the Netherlands and he's also worked in New Zealand. So I was also asking him, you know, what do you think about this question? Because I thought it's an interesting one. And I think it's kind of like when he got accepted to study in London, it was like, wow, you got into London, what a big name, you know, oh, that must be amazing. And in reality, it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, you can have some good experiences and some good teaching, and you can have some bad experiences and not such great teaching. It's just a name of a place. And I have a similar feeling when I go to New Zealand and I'm back there and they say, oh, how was your experience studying in Europe, you know? And you kind of say, oh, well, it was, you know, some things were great and some things could have been better, you know, it's just an impression. So in general, I think actually New Zealanders tend to look on Europe and go, oh, Europe, wow, that must be such an amazing experience. And maybe because it's, we have a saying, you see through rose-tinted glasses. So you see things like maybe better than they really are, or there's like a kind of fairy tale image of what Europe is like. And in reality, it's not always the case. It has its lovely things and it has its things that can also be improved. So in general, I mean, the Europeans I meet in any case, they tend to be quite open-minded. And they do tend to be quite curious of your experience of where I'm from and my musical background or education. But I think possibly there's a perspective in New Zealand anyway, and possibly other parts of the world, where they look on Europe as, whoa, you know, Europe. And I don't think that's always like an honest view as to how the situation really is. Does that make sense?
To me, it does, because I have the experience of like being born in a European country that was, I guess, at least it felt always of itself being seen by the other European countries as some kind of black sheep. So, you know, because Romania was a communist country for many years, and after we got rid of communism, I remember those few years in the 90s, the beginning ones, where every terrible statistic, it was like the last countries in Europe are Romania and Albania, you know, something like, whatever bad it was, we were there, like in the last places. And we always thought that if we could get out of here and go to Belgium or France or Germany or Austria or Norway or whatever, that's where the real stuff is going on. Whether it was a better standard of life or higher culture or better work ethic, we always looked up to Europe. And eventually Romania did get into the European Union, and many people started working abroad and started visiting, and now everybody wants to go back to Romania because they just, I think, of course, these things are true. Like there is higher standard of living, higher wages, more civilized in many ways, but also people do feel like home in Romania, and they like things there a lot. And then you realize that all these countries have their problems also, and there's like let's say bad mentalities everywhere. It's not just from where you're coming from.
I wanted to add something small that I think it's also for the same for Ella, that in Mexico we had always this feeling of inferiority, looking up to Europe and to US, for example, and to the big countries. And when I applied to Sibelius Academy in Finland and also Den Haag in Netherlands, I didn't go to apply thinking that I will be able to get in, you know, because people were very negative in Mexico. Like, why are you applying? It's like, you're from Mexico, you don't have the talent, you don't have the level to apply to these big schools. And I got into both. And then once I was in Finland, I realized that that was not the case. My education in Mexico was not only sufficient, was quite good. Like I didn't go into solfege into the lowest level. I went into the middle level. I felt like all these things that we were told when I was young, that we are worse than you guys or we're worse than US, were not true once I was there. So that was also a relief, you know, and I feel that for anyone coming from, you know, a third world country, not including Ella, because New Zealand is quite a development. I have to just from the pictures, quite beautiful country, but from the poorest places on the world, that it's not always like the gap is not that big. That's what I'm trying to say.
It's interesting that kind of everybody is here describing their experiences of kind of feeling inferior and maybe looking up to something else, and then describing that maybe it wasn't true. And I could say that maybe actually my Finnish experience is kind of similar. Okay, now I'm the bad guy here who never went to really study in another country, but when I have been in master courses or festivals or other similar situations in other European countries, where I first kind of thought that, oh, I'm going to Germany. Okay, now they're really maybe making these things really well. And then I kind of realized, not actually like, well, probably there are places in Germany where they are doing stuff really strongly, but not everywhere. And when I kind of realized, I don't know, it was kind of not a shock, but it kind of put me thinking like, how much are we actually hindered by the thinking that I'm just from this little country that doesn't kind of, you know, make any sense.
And I think in my case of Romania, it was mostly how Romanians thought they would do outside compared to how these people from outside talked about us. Like we had the bad impression of us from their point of view more than they had it about us.
And I think actually very often in the popular discussion, this is also the case in Finland, that people are thinking, oh, we're so bad at that, and we're so bad at that, and we cannot make any triumph in the world. And then if it really happens, like it has happened, for example, for some sports or some, let's say, conductors or some singular composers, it's like some kind of phenomenon that everybody's
like
oh, how can this happen? And then everybody's just getting crazy about it. So, but I'm just thinking, why does it need to be like this? Why can't we just kind of think that, okay, people are probably doing their work everywhere in the world and probably a bit differently everywhere. So it's interesting to look around and see what, you know, how things are done in each different places. And then just, you know, in any case, it's just hard work and nothing else pretty much. And then you can success from wherever you come. That was maybe the empty idealistic speech.
I wanted to say something because you asked me about composers in Mexico from the Baroque and stuff like that, and I think I didn't answer to you. So I was just going into. I think I can recommend you Manuel de Sumaya. I can write it down here, and Antonio Salazar. They are like late Baroque, and they have Sumaya has certain choir pieces that have very interesting rhythmical features because it takes its influences from indigenous populations. So there's a lot of you know, like how is that? There's the theory that the chaconne actually comes from New Spain. So there's this rhythm, taga the pap pap pap, taga the taga the ta ta. So it has a lot of choir pieces from late Baroque, which are in that rhythm, which I find quite interesting. But sorry, I was just remembered I didn't answer your question. Let me put your names here.
Nice, thanks. We will put them to the what's the subtitles or something. Ella, how about the New Zealand scene, or what would you suggest to us, Europeans that don't care enough about the other world? What would you suggest?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because in New Zealand, we had for a long time actually Finnish conductor for our orchestra and Finnish concertmaster we still have. Now we have a Dutch conductor. So it's like we often get a lot of influence from Europe in our symphony orchestras. Was this a little bit the direction you were going down, or more?
Maybe more like kind of
Zealand, not the
people who are originally from New Zealand and are like composers or conductors or soloists or whatever, you know, names that we would need to know, so to say.
Okay, well, I can say a few names. Maybe you've heard of Kirita Kanawa. She's a
Kirita Kanawa, no?
Jonathan Luamu as well. He's also, we have wonderful singers coming out of New Zealand. I don't know what it is. I can't tell you what it is, but they're incredibly beautiful voices. When I was in youth orchestra in New Zealand, I was a stand partner of a conductor who's become quite famous now in America. Her name is Gemma New. She's now she studied in Peabody in America. So now I'm the one going, oh, America, you know, but then, so she's now a big name to kind of follow. And composers, we have like Gareth Farr. He also does a lot with this Polynesian influence. Jack Boddy, Anthony Ritchie. These are some composers I like a lot. Selena Fisher, she's another young one who writes incredibly like poetic sounding music. It's very beautiful. So those are some names anyway coming out of New Zealand. And I don't know if this is necessarily relevant, but we have actually a big international violin competition, the Michael Hill violin competition. It's got quite a lot of international recognition now. So slowly New Zealand is starting to kind of create a sort of chance for people to kind of experience some of our music and our musicians as well.
And of course, very soon, Ella van der Mespel.
Oh.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Could you actually also write the names for the chat so that we put maybe to the subtitles? Because
Yes.
I need to admit at least some of the names just went through my ears like, how am I going to spell that? But
most of them were composers, so I can. I'm happy to do that. No problem.
yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Or send an email then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take
Okay,
care of it.
we've been talking quite a lot long this time. It's it's been a pleasure, but maybe it's time to wrap up. In the end, I would like to ask actually, if you could combine the best sides of each of the cultures that you've lived in. So what kind of combination would that be?
That's a very good last question.
First?
The things I have a huge appreciation for in the Dutch musical culture. Maybe I was wondering the whole time why you chose The Hague as an institution to apply to study for, but there's a big emphasis on early music and a kind of respect for discovering really how people played music in Baroque time and earlier. So there's a lot of rather puristic approaches to early music making. And I love that there's a kind of emphasis on really discovering this. And at the same time, the complete other side of it, that they can be so forward thinking and create such modern experimental music that you can have both spectrums, and that there are ensembles that are full-time working ensembles that feature both completely different-ended musical genres in a way. So I like that it's so broad and open-minded in that respect. And I think if I were to be able to have that element with this New Zealand cultural broadness in terms of respecting a kind of a tradition of what was there before the Pākehā came to New Zealand. So again, it's this inclusion of broad spectres of the classical music scene and cultures within a country that I was born in. So does that make sense? It's a
yeah.
bit, but,
it's a combination I would at least buy immediately.
Yeah, great.
Interesting. How about for Itzam?
So I wanted, now that it's Musica Nova in Finland, I was thinking of the festival that we have in Mexico, which is it's called like, let me translate it, New Forum of Contemporary Music, something like that, yeah? And it's after the composer Manuel Enriquez. And it's similar to Musica Nova, in which you have orchestra, chamber music, and everything. But the biggest difference is that all the pieces are selected by application. So I think that was a wonderful decision I did there. And so, for example, me as a composer, I can send my piece. Me as an ensemble, I can say the pieces that I want to play. So then the whole festival has this kind of more cohesive, well, less cohesive as a festival, but more inviting.
Meritocratic.
Exactly. Well, you of course have have people who have to decide that, which is always a problem. But you do get, for example, very young composers that get played by the orchestras, and that's also is international, so everybody can apply. By the way, almost nobody applies because they don't know about it. But also there's no money prize, so it's not like a competition. It's just a festival. And I think like if they had the money of Musica Nova to do that, it would be an amazing ensemble. And we have the ensembles that we have in Finland. Sorry, to combine things. Something I also, so the music scene in Finland, I think is one of the best in the world. Let's put it like that. Even you guys are there, you probably don't feel it, but you have incredibly high quality orchestras, incredibly high quality musicians everywhere. You take any violinist from Sibelius Academy and he's gonna play very well. So you have a very homogeneous kind of level in which you are not gonna get bad musicians. And that's something that the Everest Trinity system wants to do, but doesn't really get there. So I think there's something to be learned from the music, how the music institutions work in Finland, because you get this homogenization of very good level, which at the same time you get many composers who write very similar music. That never happens in Mexico. You take two Mexican composers, and one of them is going to be writing like avant-garde in Den Haag, which we actually, you asked why I chose to Den Haag, because I have a friend who was studying there, and he said, come here, it's super liberal, super free. It's you can do whatever you want, and the teachers are good, and that kind of called me in. I chose Finland ultimately because in Finland they were like, we are not free, you're going to learn how to compose, and you're going to have a lot of structure. So I felt that was better for me. Maybe it wasn't, you never know. But but yeah, so the UAE, they just accept, because 80% foreigners, they just accept whatever. So it's not only about the nationality, it's also about the culture, about the faith. It's an incredibly respectful place. They really don't care where you're from, where your passport says. For the most part, there's of course exceptions, but like I remember one of the biggest differences. Whenever I meet somebody in Finland, they will ask me where I'm from, right? It's something you ask in most of the world, and in Dubai, they just don't ask you where you're from. I know I have friends who I have no idea where they're from because it doesn't matter. And I think that has good things and bad things. And in general, it just makes you feel like you are respected as an individual and not someone with a huge baggage of information because of where you're from. Because me telling you that I'm from Mexico will create a lot of images in your head. And a lot of them are going to be wrong, a lot of them are going to be right. But I just don't want you to have those images. I want you to meet me as a person and then think, okay, he's Mexican because of this and this, but he also does those other things. That I love about Dubai. What I don't like is that there's absolutely still, the music world is just growing. I would like that Mexico will have the confidence that people in Europe has, you know, to believe that they can actually do what they're doing. What they're doing is worth and is good. And I would like that, I don't know, the music world of Finland will be exported somewhere else. They will be able to, we will be able to learn better why the education system works better in Finland, why the music system is just so good.
Let's wait and see, because the curriculum changed like 2 years ago. Let's wait how that works out.
Yeah, well, and especially actually just to the audience, if you are interested in some aspects of the Finnish music education system, you might go and see our very first real episode, which was with Markku Klammi.
Episode number 3.
However, oh, sorry, well, I thought it was kind of the first real where we had some guests. And
no, but I said let the number in case somebody wants
Sure,
to see.
Yeah, you're right. That's more important. Thanks. I think, you know, the things you summarized also, they are relevant things.
This was a great discussion, guys, by the way. I mean, I felt I learned a lot listening to you, and let's say, it opened my eyes in certain aspects. So thank you very much.
For me too. Yeah, I want to thank really much of you both, Ella and Itzam.
You can find out more about them in the video description if you want. And you want me to do it? I have to do it, right?
Yeah, probably that part.
Like, share, and subscribe. Yeah.
But
that's definitely gonna work.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you, Itzam. And goodbye, everyone, from KeyKulture podcast. And I was Niilo Tarnanen, hosting this with Matei Gheorghiu, and we will be back sooner than you realize.
All right. Bye, everybody.